Well, I guess I'm not going to play the video because I totally botched that.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome
Oh,
to Conversations of God book club for Awaken the Species. Um, I'm Sean Edward Phillips, and joined by Hank Setala.
Setala.
What's good? Setala for tonight. What's good, Hank?
Oh, thanks. And you know what got me is I think you changed the brand back to CwG, and all the stuff is under a different thing, and I couldn't get to the video.
Oh,
It
so,
totally got. I wasn't
so this is
even
what
paying
happened
attention.
when I get control and throws Hank off his game.
That's all right. Oh, and I got a message that something isn't. Oh, I forgot to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, one sec. I gotta just start the stream somewhere else. So give me a moment if you want to kind of give an overview of what we've been doing the last couple of weeks. And
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Hello, Facebookers and YouTubers and future viewers. How are things going in your world? Um, so this is the second book club night that Hank and I have done for Conversations with God, book 4, Awaken the Species. So we're doing about 5 chapters at a time. So today we're covering chapters 6 through 10. Yeah, and we're just exploring the chapters, or the book kind of chapter by chapter or sections by sections. If you've been with, Hank's been doing the CWG meetup group for about 10 years now, and then Hank and I have been doing it together for about 6 months now, 6 months
I
ish,
think
about
about it.
six months. Um, so as you know, normally that's sort of a open discussion, pick a page out of the trilogy, which is really cool. So this one's just a bit different where we're specifically going through book 4 of the CWG in tonight's chapter 6 through 10. Um, so yeah, just curious, for anybody out there, I see there's a couple comments. Hello, hello. Unicorns and rainbows. So
Oh,
maybe
must be Mike without even looking.
pull that up. We got some unicorns and rainbows. Hey, Mike. Um, yeah, unicorns are great.
And I
Um,
apologize, everyone. I'm so wasn't prepared because I couldn't find my headphones, and then everything got thrown off. I'm just starting the stream to a couple other pages here, and so my
yeah.
apologies.
So like
I'm almost done.
like I was going to get to, just curious if you're joining us, welcome to the discussion. But who's all following along? Who's reading the book with us? Who's read book 4? You know what what have been some things you've noticed from the book or takeaways, and in particular around chapters maybe 6 through 10 tonight, or previous chapters 1 through 5, if you've had some insights since we got together last week. Just kind of open the discussion for anybody that would like to bring something up that they noticed. I've got my notes this week again, when I had, and Hank said he didn't take any notes, but he did say he's read the chapter twice. So
I never said anything about twice. Well, maybe I did imply that.
you implied it was
but
twice.
but I listened to it today on Audible, and then I kind of skimmed through the book, and we're officially streaming everywhere that we're supposed to be streaming to. So welcome everyone. If
Hey, Annie.
Yeah, and so if you're a member of the Conversations with Consciousness group, there's also a link where if you want to come online and join us on video, you can. There's a link to join us in studio if you want to be a part of it. And if you didn't catch last time, book 4 is about awakening the species. Neale got a
That's
knock.
the name of the book.
Yep, it's not a spoiler. Yep. So he got woken up like he did when he first got the channelings so many years ago, and he took to pen and paper again. And this was what was called the fourth invitation, which is really about awakening the species. And we
It's
kind of
actually the third invitation, but
third
that's
invitation. True. Well, the next invitation. We'll get less specific so I can. Yeah. But anyway.
fourth book, third invitation.
Third book, fourth invitation, and it's all about awakening the species and really going from, my wording is, from human doings to human beings, where we're starting to function with the awareness that we're all one instead of separate and instead of having relationships, having creationships. And
Mm-hmm.
was there anything you want to recap from last time, or anybody else that is just joining us that anybody else that's just joining us that had something from last week that they wanted to bring up? Or not? Let's see. Well, I've not read it. I did hear him speak about it on Mind Valley, so she was just offering that. And he's been local in Lilydale recently, where I was able to go see him in person a couple times, so that was really exciting. Cool, cool. But we do have adding to the stream. We have actual book 6 of that we can kind of highlight. I know, Sean, you said that there were some passages that you liked that you wanted to kind of highlight.
Yeah, and I'm particularly impressed that we're in book 6, Hank. I mean,
you mean chapter 6?
We're like way ahead. Where are we at in Futureland? It's great.
Book 6 is going to be when Neale reincarnates as another author.
Yeah. So we have the book. Actually, the passages, I highlighted a few for this week, and there actually wasn't any in chapter 6 I had. So I have some notes though. So chapter 6 picks up where chapter 5 left off. Funny how these things work, but at the end of chapter 5, Neale kind of led into this whole next chapter here with saying that he thinks we're one decision away, and God kind of asks, well, what is the decision? So to start the chapter, this is what Neale's thoughts were about what the one decision is, to kind of awaken the species and how it's one choice. And basically the decision that Neale is that we need to accept and explore it. It's explore and then accept the reality of who we really are, to change the global experience of our species. So really tapping into that sort of divinity that we truly be, and the full self-expression that they talk about in the chapters, and that kind of is the lead in to chapter 6. So anywhere where you're looking to go with this, Hank?
Well, just with the reality of who we are, the other part that kind of stands out to me is this last little bit on this page, that in turn, like when we start to think that way and we really start to become awakened, that it will change everything about how we experience life and how we interact with each other. Because when we are really stepping into that, you would never do anything to hurt someone else, or you would be more like what they talk about in book 3, which is going to come up here shortly, about the highly evolved being. So this is just setting the tone for the rest of it.
That engagement that God particularly calls out to Neale is that the quickest way to awaken yourself is to basically start the awakening process for another. Because when you're in that energy of acknowledging that you're awake and actively being awake with the basically intent of doing the things and being the things that an awakened being does, you basically have no choice but to embody it in everything you do. And the easiest way to start being in that energy is to work with others or talk to others to get them on the path to awaken. And it's very neat is my verbiage. And I have somewhere else I'd like to go a little bit with that, but I'll kind of let you chime in, Hank.
Well, the one thing I wanted to say with that is it goes beyond just awakening. In the first books, the original trilogy, he talks about not just with awakening, but with abundance or with a particular knowledge. Anything you want to bring into your life, if you help another to receive that in a way that you're acknowledging that you have it in order for them to receive it. And so it's a way of really stepping into whatever it is that you're looking to create. And you can do that with money, with abundance, with security, whatever state of being you're looking to bring into yourself. You help someone else to have that, and that kind of speeds up the process. And if you can do that for not just one person, but if you do that for 20 people, Neale has what he calls the multiplier effect. So if you have a class on awakening, for example, with the 25 people, and you're helping 25 people to become awakened, then you are exponentially giving that to yourself, because you're impacting that many other individualizations of divinity. So it's more useful than just awakening.
Yeah. And one thing I did that I feel drawn to call out, and they talk about it throughout the chapters 6 through 10 here, and I don't know exactly which pages they talk about, and that being a leader isn't necessarily or showing that you're going about awakening another. It doesn't have to necessarily be this deliberate effect. It's more as you express yourself more, that is what becomes.
Right. It's kind
Is
of like
how I
living
would
by
describe
example.
it. Yeah, it's more of that. Yeah, living by example more than anything, not some goal or objective where you go out and say, I'm going to awaken 5 people today. Like, that's kind of a funny way to go about it when you think about it. Like awakening is somehow this like objective. I mean, in a sense it kind of is, but it's like, the real intention is the self-expression of you, and then you can begin to basically rub off on other people with that exuberance, or you being you is what causes other people to wake up more and ask questions. Now, you can certainly engage with people and probe them and say, hey, have you checked this out, or asking questions, to kind of get their um, molecules going and moving in the direction of maybe choosing to be awake or acknowledge that they're awake. You could certainly prod that. It's just, the whole thing is starts with you.
Yeah. And two things to kind of go along with that. One, it's about just being what you're being, and you're not trying to change anyone, but you're leading by example. So instead of trying to force a change, you're just holding the space for them to have a different possibility. And the other thing that this kind of reminisces with is in chapter 5, I think it was chapter 5, he was talking about all you need to do is start with you, and then that
Mm-hmm.
impacts your little community, and then that community impacts the bigger community, and it starts this ripple effect. But it really just starts with you being the authentic self.
Yeah.
Very cool. Anything else on this page? And also, everyone, if you have any questions as we go through this, feel free to make a comment. We're happy to respond and interact with you as well. So don't forget that. Okie dokie. Next one. Or was the chapter 6 was really, or 7 was really fast, or 6 was fast.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone for tuning, and thank you everyone that is tuned in. I'm grateful to have you here with us. Yeah, the final part of chapter 6 is basically a lead into highly evolved beings, which is what chapter 7 is about.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, and highly evolved beings were talked a little bit about in the original trilogy, book 3, like from chapter 16 to the end, was all about highly evolved beings. And and Neale was talking about, we mean these are beings from outer space, and though they're acknowledging that that's the case, they're talking about beings that may be interdimensional, that exist outside our time and space, that have the ability to, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but they're talking about beings that aren't necessarily like what you're thinking about from the TV shows with aliens coming here or anything like that. It's these beings that are here to assist, that are just in another realm in a sense, but they're still overlapping with us in a way.
Yeah. My perspective for a lot of the rest of these chapters here, 6 through 10, there's a lot of intricate questions that Neale gets into. He asks like very specific things about highly evolved beings, and have they always been there to contribute to our species? The short answer is yes. God offers that one of the things is that we're becoming more aware of the existence and presence of highly evolved beings, and that's part of this choosing point that we have currently, which is at the end of chapter, I think it's at the end of this chapter, maybe they talk about the choice point that we're at, and that part of that is this awareness of highly evolved beings. So I guess for me, Hank, I did have a section to pull up on, just because I think this whole section around highly evolved beings is so dynamic and it kind of goes in so many places. Maybe start with that and just pull up the first quote I had so that we can draw it a
Which
particular
quote?
section.
Which
So
one
the
was your
quote
first quote?
is, "You might call common sense."
Come on. I'm having trouble getting my search bar to come up. Where is it here? Oh, here we go. You might call common sense.
Yeah.
Right here. So you want to just read this little part, or we read it?
Yeah, we can. I think it starts on the chapter before. Chapter before, geez, the page before.
Okay, so if you're paying attention to what you're sensing, you'll be able to make sense of it all. People who don't understand this powerful senses that are built into all human beings, what you might call your common sense, may get all mixed up, and in frustration, they may call what they are experiencing nonsense. Oh, I love that little play on
Yeah,
words.
it's a cool. It is cool, and then God calls out later that it's not a play on words. It's words quite accurately to get across an important message. So if we flip back the page for a minute and just highlight that part, if you're paying attention to what you're sensing, you'll be able to make sense of it all. So to me, this section, I had a call out in that it's really when you pick up on something or you have an awareness, it's sort of going into that question that's like, what is this? What is this awareness I'm having? And really engaging with all the facilities of our bodies and being that we have, to gain awareness and engaging with that more. That's what spoke to me, and that is something to call out. Is it's really asking a question when we have a sense or something, and really aiming to get a grasp of what that energy of what we're aware of really is, instead of just like tuning it out, which we can do a lot.
Right. And part of this was prompted by Neale was asking. There was a conversation before this about that not all advanced civilizations are necessarily
Yes.
evolved, and they give the example that if you took somebody from 2,000 years ago and plopped them here in 2020, though we are more advanced in technology and our infrastructure and all that, we're still relatively a violent species. We're still doing things that would not be considered civilized or evolved. So Neale was asking, well, if there's these other beings out there that aren't all nice and fluffy or whatever, like how are we supposed to tell the difference? How do we
How
know?
would we know which ones are good, which ones are here to help, and which ones are here to, skin our butts?
Right. And so they go through, and that's where the sensing, like you can feel the vibration of it. And to give the example, almost everybody can relate to walking into a room where there was just a fight and you just have that tension in the air. Or if you walk into a particular restaurant, or you just have situations in life where I need to leave. Like, this isn't for me. And it's that same sense, that sense that you get. It's just a knowing that you get, that you would be able to tell what beings are going to be a contribution to you and which ones would not be.
Yeah.
Cool. I love how Bill was just like, what? That's a new age answer. Excuse me. Feel the vibe, man.
Yeah, if you listen to the Audible, if you choose to listen to it, he's kind of snarky when he says that too.
Yeah, and I could just imagine him actually writing it out this way, like really being in that real conversation with it all. Okay, so
yeah, so I had the notes I had were kind of like, you called out already, kind of the difference between, God calls out, the difference between a highly evolved species or beings and highly advanced civilizations. They're different. Being technologically advanced doesn't equate to being morally, ethically, and spiritually or consciously advanced as a species. So God kind of makes that delineation on that, which you called up, Hank.
yeah, let's see. Just seeing if there's anything else on this page.
Yeah.
Mhm. Perhaps not.
Yeah. Kind of the last thing I had in here.
Choice point.
Well, the choice point, and then just before the choice point, they kind of talk about with highly evolved beings, because it's kind of this, and I'm speaking for myself, and then also kind of picking up from what Neale's point of view was during this conversation to a degree, was like, we're I say we, but generally we get God as a like, oh, well, we can certainly commune with God, and receive assistance that way. When it comes to highly evolved beings, Neale had a little more, I don't want to say angst, but it was definitely not I didn't get the sense as much of a welcoming or readiness to accept that idea. Or it could be that he was just asking the questions so that the awareness would come through in the book. I'm not quite sure where. One of those two seems pretty good. And pretty much that, there's a quote in this that God basically says, you don't necessarily have to be aware that it's a highly evolved being that you're receiving a contribution for, or that's part of what's advancing your personal self-expression. You just have to be willing to receive the benefit. It's not that you have to know that it's a highly evolved being, which in the text, I think it was a bit hard to grasp some of that concept through the way the dialogue went.
Well, and one thing that Neale was bringing up is that a lot of people who read the book might not be in a space where they're willing or able to really have that experience of having these exchanges with
Yeah,
highly evolved beings. And he's like, well,
yeah,
he gives the example of, well, if I invite you into my house and you accepted the invitation to awaken, right? And I'm serving hors d'oeuvres, call that the highly evolved beings. You don't necessarily have to eat the hors d'oeuvres just because you accepted the invitation to come in. So
yeah,
essentially, to use the metaphor Neale used in the book, people can awaken, but not necessarily have to go down that road if it's not their cup of tea.
yeah. And that is actually the start of chapter 8.
Oh, look at me. Spoiler. Okay. See, I don't forget where the things are in what book, chapters or whatnot. But but finishing up with chapter 7 is that they were talking about that we have reached this choice point and we've gained the ability to see exactly that very quickly in cosmic terms, and the
Yeah,
conditions and circumstances that you abnegate are in fact ideal, meaning that, well, this was written in 2016, but there's so much happening on the planet now that so many people are being shaken awake that we're in a place now as a species where there may just be enough of a volume of people to really cause this awakening across the species.
yeah. And I kind of flash back for myself, in the US, think back to 2016, what was going on. I mean, that was, about the time when I think Trump got elected in 2016, or that was the start of kind of a pretty big shift in whether you like Donald or don't, it's definitely been a pretty wild ride over the last few years here. And this was kind of coming out as that was starting. And then obviously today, if you look around with, we've talked about it on our calls, look at the world right now in 2020, in June of 2020, and it's pretty wild, um, to put it mildly, right?
Yeah,
And there's certainly a lot of different awarenesses and change, and just that the choice point, that's talked about here, definitely seems to be congruent with what's going on.
yeah, and I would invite everybody listening today to take every moment to be that choice point where you can actually respond to things instead of react to things, and really see if you can start choosing from that impulse of the soul, like we were talking about last week in the book discussion, where there's these things that come from deep within, that if you were to follow it, like that's Neale's impulse of the soul to write this book as an example. There's these very high ideas, or I don't want to use the word high ideas, but there's these wonderful inspirations that if we really seized them as they came, we could change the world overnight. So take every moment as that choice point, and do as much as you can to choose those things that are going to create possibility for you and the planet. So onward to chapter 8. Well, we already kind of touched in with it a little bit.
Yeah, we
Is
let
there,
in. We let in. Yeah, you let us in.
let's see.
Um, which effectively the start of the chapter is God basically says, well, like highly evolved beings have been, visiting, participating, and contributing to the advancement or evolution of the human species or the species for hundreds of years. It's not like this just started.
Yeah. And in the first 5 chapters, I forget exactly where it was, but the comment even came up that Jesus was a spaceman, quote unquote, and there was
Yeah,
a
they
whole
did.
dialogue around that. And so if you haven't read it, definitely go back and you can catch up with us and read all that interesting dialogue. But some of the great ascended masters, maybe even, could have been these highly evolved beings that were manifesting in the physical to help humanity along towards this choice point that we're in now.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to pause for a minute before going in, and just kind of ask, um, our viewers, what do you think of all this highly evolved being topic with in this conversation? Have you perceived highly evolved beings? Do you get an awareness with it? Yeah, questions.
Yeah,
Questions or comments or just anything you'd like to share with um, kind of what does it mean for you when we talk about highly evolved beings here? Have you gotten any different awarenesses or new awarenesses, or maybe awarenesses you've had and just would like to share?
yeah,
Totally open to listening or
definitely. And if you're
hearing
watching
what
it
they are.
on any of the Facebook pages, like Holistic Health and Healing or Sonic Shaman or Sean's page, we will not see the comments unless you click through to YouTube, because the way we're streaming there, we can't pull them up in studio. So the only comments that we can see here are if you're looking on my personal profile page or YouTube or in the Conversations with Consciousness discussion group. And I know there's other people watching, but if you are, head over to the YouTube channel. There's a link in the description where I posted it, and you can click through and comment there so we can see it. And if we don't see it, then we will talk about it next time.
Yeah.
Actually, we did have a question from last week. I can go back to that real quick if I remember where it was. But basically, the person was making the comment that, are we actually having are we awakening, or do we have the opportunity to awaken? And so they basically, well, I already responded to their comment actually, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Someone says, well, does this mean that we have to awaken, or is it still just, is it an opportunity? Can we miss the chance? What's your stance on that?
Um, do we have to awaken? No. Would be my take. Like, no. And I think God mentioned it in a response with Neale in one of the first 5 chapters, where it's basically, we can choose whatever future we'd like, or whatever expression of self in our species that we'd like to have. There's nothing being commanded of humanity or of you to awaken. It's an invitation to say, hey, if you'd like to awaken, if you'd like to experience reality, your world, or just something greater than what you're having, then this is the invitation to choose that and
Yeah.
to start integrating it into your day-to-day life. I mean, that's kind of the whole invitation part. And you get to choose, which is another beauty of the universe, that we have free will and free choice. So
Yeah. And now that I remember to go make my stream public on my page, a couple comments did come through. We had Becky just saying that, hi, Hank and Sean, thanks for these
hi, Becky.
conversations. And funny, she just heard about a book called 54 Senses. So it's just very timely. We were talking about the whole senses and vibration thing, and that came into her world at the same time.
Yeah.
And I believe Mary Lee was probably referring to these highly evolved beings and possibly being the pyramid builders, the helpers, the avatars that have helped to make some of the things from the
Yeah.
past. And then just now, There has been much talk about the Great Awakening and Ascension. They talk about ET helping us. There is also mention of an angelic-like help. I am just trying to figure out what is true to me. And that's the big key. What is true to you? Because that's all we really can say is what's true for me, the individual. You know, what's my truth isn't necessarily Sean's truth, isn't necessarily your truth, and so on. And the greatest test of that is how we had that sense. We were talking about the senses earlier. What's true for you typically will feel light, or will have the sense of relaxation with it. And what's not true for you will typically feel heavy or have the feeling of tension. It's like the binary dialogue of the universe. If you can develop that intuitive sense, the rest can come pretty easily with just that binary dialogue of exploring. And then Becky was saying ancient aliens. Yeah, Ed might be a
There we go. It's those pyramid builders, helpers, and avatars. Yeah, we'll get Ed Edwards on.
Yeah, well, if I can. He's been so busy because he was on Ancient Aliens that I have a hard time connecting with him now. But I might get him on. That would be great if I can find time in his schedule. And for those of you who don't know, Ed Edwards, he's one of the most studied healers on the planet. He was on Ancient Aliens, hooked up to equipment where they could actually measure his manipulation of energy fields and light photons coming off of him and all kinds of stuff. And we jokingly called him Eddie the Alien. Maybe it's true.
Probably.
Could be.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
He's real Southern draw. I met him because we had him up at the Holistic Health and Healing Expo last October, and he's very interesting, and he gave a talk that was really good. So he did the energy thing on me. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do a whole segment just talking about it, but I'll try to get him on. That would be fun to do a holistic highlights with Ed, and
yeah.
he can even do things virtually, so he'll knock you around and make you like sway back and forth even from your computer,
which is wild. But I mean, hey, that's energy. You know, there's distance doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Any other?
I was just gonna.
Well, I was going to say any other questions or comments before we look to move on. My Magic Mike is giving us all kinds of little emojis. Easter Island emojis and goats. Mike,
that's what it is. It's the Easter Island heads.
Yeah, those are the Easter Island heads, which could be from highly evolved beings. Now the goats, Mike, I don't get what you're talking about with the goats, but that's all right.
Yeah,
that's what we call Magic Mike.
Yeah. The goats are funny. If I've been watching a TV show called Future Man on Hulu, and it just went through this whole section where one of the characters basically lives with a goat alone, sort of, for a really, really long time, like eons. And the goat is the master, the greatest of all time, and it's actually a goat. It's quite funny.
Interesting. Oh, and he says it's a movie. Okay.
The Goat is a movie?
I guess. I don't know.
Greatest of all time?
Greatest of all time. Yep. So other people are picking up what Mike's putting down. I'm just the only one that's left in the dark here.
Yeah, and it's funny because in Future Man, they actually have it a goat, and Gandhi references him as the greatest of all time. And then you like flash over to this goat, and it took me a second to go, what? And I'm like, oh. Look at you silly writers.
All right. Well, as we continue on, if you have questions or comments, just still make them and everything. I'm on a page where I won't be able to see, but Sean, you can bring up comments and let me know if somebody has something. So going to chapter 8, Neil's getting excited. Oh, this is very interesting. And God was referencing that these highly evolved beings and UFO sightings, it's not just these past years, but it's been centuries that these things have been happening, which then we're getting back to the pyramid time, like Mary was.
Ancient aliens.
Yep.
There really were, they really visited us, which I laughed. Have you ever watched that show, Hank?
Just the episode with Ed Edwards.
Oh, okay. I remember watching it as a kid, I was about 10. And then I couldn't figure out how come they had to do a whole series about if there were ancient aliens. I'm like, didn't we prove it in episode 1? Like, like, isn't that confirmed? Like, I mean, why have 12 more seasons? Like,
Well, and there was one other one that I saw there. I'm friends with Ross Hamilton, and he literally wrote the book on the Serpent Mounds, and he was featured on Ancient Aliens, talking about like if there are mines and stuff underneath the Serpent Mound and all that, which is a location in southern Ohio. So there's a whole other potential thing with that. What was the other thing with aliens specifically? I
Yeah,
had
I
it.
mean, did you
Come
see
back.
Transformers? I mean, totally 15,000 years ago they visited Earth. I mean, just saying.
I can't follow along with that conversation. I haven't
Oh,
watched that since I
someone
was.
else in the audience will get it.
Okay. Oh, but what was the thing with? I had it.
Becky,
I had a really good thought.
Future Man is on Hulu. If you're interested in checking it out. Um,
Was that what we're talking about, Future Man?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's on Hulu. It's a Hulu original series, actually, so I'm not sure if you'll find it anywhere else unless you know, use those um, sites.
Yeah. Oh, now I remember what the alien thing. Or did I just forget it again? Oh my gosh, I can't believe my head's not. Oh, indigenous cultures, like in the Peruvian tradition, they have like a star festival, and they believe that the entire planet was seeded by star beings and everything, and
Hmm.
that it was basically like we're all from somewhere. We're all from like a celestial
Yeah.
space in the universe.
Yeah, so the awareness I have with that, Hank, is that I heard this and then I followed the energy and was asking questions if it was light or if I was kind of like if that was a truth for me, and that parts of humanity are more like star people, that came from the stars, kind of like you're talking about. Were seeded from the stars, and then there's other parts of humanity. If you hear different creation stories where people came from the earth, so it's sort of this. It's not quite a dichotomy, but it's kind of that idea that there's different species living on the planet. If you have people that came from the stars and people that came from the ground, they're probably a little bit different in how they be in existence. So just um, kind of some info to share or stuff that
Yep.
was in my awareness.
And Annie was asking this if we saw that Trump's son asked him about Roswell. I missed that, and she said just a few days ago he said he cannot speak about it now, but is very interesting. I'm hoping for full disclosure soon. That would be interesting. If anybody would give it full disclosure, would be our current leader.
I'm a little out of the loop.
I have
Roswell rings a bell.
Roswell. I know there's a whole TV show about it, but it was something UFO related years ago. I don't
That's what I
remember all the
recall was
specifics.
something UFO related. Yeah, Annie, if you happen to know it or have a brief, yeah. Hey Becky. Oh, I see Becky just asked humans and humanoids. Yeah, so that's kind of an access consciousness way, and yeah, it's kind of like that. Humans kind of came from the earth, and humanoids more as star
Does Access
people.
actually say that? I've never heard that yet.
No, access doesn't say that,
Oh, you're
but
saying that, yeah.
well, I had a friend who kind of was like, hey, she had this awareness, and I was like, oh yeah, that's probably that probably goes pretty congruent with that human and humanoid thing that they talk about.
Yeah. And then they also have there's a whole nother book now, Talk to the End of These Beings of Light, where they're saying there's also beings of light on the planet as a species, as well as techies. So they Access acknowledges 4 different ones now. And in regards to Roswell, Annie was saying that it
That's
was from
right.
Area
Yes.
51, 1950.
Thank you,
So
Mike.
Area
Crash.
51, I remember. Yeah.
You know what? No, they mentioned it in Men in Black. That's what I was thinking of. There's a reference to the
Okay.
Roswell in Men in Black, so that's what rang all the bells. Men in Black had to cover it up or something, or
It
was
makes
it
me
the
really
guy?
think a movie like Men in Black, when you start talking about other species being on the planet, really makes you think twice, doesn't it?
Oh, it's really cool because ever since I've really started doing more, awakening and stuff, it's been like, oh my gosh, like this is totally true.
Yeah, and she was saying there was a crash, and then there was a base that was well guarded, and I don't know where that was, but my parents used to serve in the Air Force, and they were down at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and there was some sort of crash around there, and there was a hangar that my mom said was like just a normal thing one day, and like the next day after that crash, it was like barbed wire, and it was totally fenced
Yeah,
off and
it's
everything.
totally like Thor, where the government just comes in after Thor crashes and Mjolnir's like in the ground, and then they just like encapsulate the object with, government facility, or what's the cube in Transformers that they built the Hoover Dam around, and all these things in these movies. It's like, well, how true is it? Pretty true.
I know. We'll find out. Wright Patterson. Oh, was it in Wright Patterson? Oh, yeah, another one.
Wright Patterson,
Wright Patterson. Yep. And that one, though, I don't have direct experience with. I've heard stories from my parents, and I have no reason to doubt that they would not have had that experience. So there's something to it. And oh, that's something separate entirely. Anyway, I was about to go off on some random tangent, not that we haven't already. But okay, so look at all where we went with just UFO sightings. Look at that. So on to the next page. Was there anything in particular in chapter 8 that kind of called out to you that we want to?
Yeah, Annie, we'll circle back to your question there. I think we're gonna maybe talk about chapter 8 for a second. Well, I just thought for a chuckle, if we pull up the part in chapter 8, it starts with, "I've already forgotten most of what you said."
Forgotten. Okay. This here. What was he talking?
Yeah.
Should I go back a page just to put this in the context?
Yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah, I guess the page before, because Neale, God like reminds Neale that they talked about highly evolved beings like for quite a while in the end of book 3, and Neale's like, "Oh yeah, I think I totally forgot that." And then there's sort of this acknowledgement from God that that is part of the human experience, but kind of with practice, you forget less and less.
Right. And one thing that reminds me of one of my teachers, he would read the Bhagavad Gita, and every time he would go through it, he would use a different color highlighter, a different color pen, and just what stands out to you and what really sinks in is different each time. So just if you've ever read any of these books, it's always worthwhile to go back. There's times when I read something from book 1 and I'm like, has this always been in this book? I don't remember reading this at all. This is so good. But sometimes you can only read what you're able to receive at the time. So it's always good to go back and give these things another look and see what might jump out at you.
Yeah, which is totally true with anything. I was rewatching some episodes of Rick and Morty last night, and I was just laughing. Like, there's just details that I just didn't see before, and I was aware of now. I'm like, wait, was that always there? That's hilarious. So just little stuff, anytime you go through something again. Yeah, I just like that. I like that little piece in chapter 8.
Yeah. And I forget where it was. Well, here it's talking about the highly evolved beings aren't just existing in the universe, but they're actually offering to help directly. And I remember, was it in here that it even alluded to that they've actually intervened to prevent like mass bad decisions, we'll just say. If I remember, there was a reference to it.
Yeah.
So thank you, highly evolved beings. Yeah.
Yeah, for all the contributions you've made.
Let's see.
Yeah, I had one last quote from chapter 8. I thought there was a good quote in section in chapter 8. And I'm going to paraphrase a bit, but God basically says, "It's important to keep your mind open, especially now. You wouldn't decide something you know nothing about is impossible, would you?" Which I think is pretty powerful, in the idea that, just because you haven't, if you're not aware of it, or, there's certain things that aren't in our awareness right now. So sort of being open to possibilities, or just keeping an open mind to what's possible as you get new information or learn about something, you can't, well, I guess it's kind of silly to say, like, if you just write off like this is anything, like, oh, this is it, this is all I have, and this is the way it is, like, how much is it out there that we don't really know that could totally be in existence if we just had the awareness of it, and just being open that, like, there could be all these crazy things that all of a sudden we're aware of, and we're like, well, doy, like, that's awesome.
There's a scene in Men in Black that I'll probably misquote a little bit, but he's talking to Will Smith and he's saying that, hey, yesterday you knew that there weren't any aliens. So many years ago, they knew that we were the only ones on this planet. So many years ago, you knew the Earth was flat. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. And it was a really
Yes,
good
that's a great
example of
quote.
just you think you
Yeah,
know, but you don't know what you don't know. And I'd like to
yeah.
offer a prayer. This is from AA, at least this is where I found it from. It's called the Set Aside Prayer, and it's a great affirmation or a great thing to say to set the tone to keep an open mind. But it starts with Infinite Spirit, God, whatever word you want to use. We give thanks for the air in our lungs, the food in our stomachs, the clothing on our backs, and the shelter over our heads. And we ask that you set aside rather everything that we think we know about, and then you list everything: politics, religion, healing, life, cosmos, whatever you like, especially about you, meaning God, so that we can have an open mind and experience the truth. It's a cool little affirmation.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Okay.
I like that Men in Black quote. Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones to Will Smith, Agent K to Agent J.
I have to see the new one. I don't know if it was any good with the new
I think,
actors.
yeah, I think, yeah, that was from the first one. I think that's when he's recruiting Jay, and Jay's sitting on a bench in New York City, like not sure if he's going to join Men in Black or not. So I think
Just going,
they're seeing.
circling back to because there have been quite a few comments since I looked
Oh,
here.
Men in
Annie,
Black 3 is pretty good. I just wanted to follow up with that because I
okay.
like sci-fi.
Well, I'll
Men in Black
definitely
3 is pretty good. It has to do with time travel. So it's pretty neat.
I'll definitely have to take a look at it. Annie was referencing, she was at a event that I hosted at the Serpent Mound where I brought Ross Hamilton in for a talk, and he was actually on exhibitions where they uncover like these huge skeletal remains that were like way larger than a normal human. He called them the tall ones. So there was just he says that a lot of that stuff is kept at the Smithsonian, and he actually got to be there to see it, but he doesn't have pictures or anything with that. And Becky was just offering, kind of in tune with our Men in Black thing, often believe that everything in movies, any concept you can come up with is true, maybe in some other dimension, but true. It's a great idea. I'm not sure what the context was for
Yeah,
that now.
full awareness. Thanks for sharing. I totally get where you're coming from with that one.
And Mike's saying Roswell Crash is where we got the tech from. Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The Hoover Dam and Transformers, man. That's where they got the airplane, and like pretty much every invention was from the crash, the object that came. They, reverse engineered it.
And also light beings were here long before us. And that's a lot of the belief of like the Caro and everything, that light beings came first and then humanity kind of came after that. This tone was set. And yes, Michael, I heard that too. Back engineered regarding about the technology. And
Yeah.
Becky just thanking us for the affirmation. Cool. Thank you for all the interaction tonight.
Yeah.
This is where the
And you're welcome.
conversation really comes alive, when you guys interact and ask
It
questions.
becomes our discussion.
Yes,
it's so exciting.
It does. And if you have any brave souls in the Facebook group, there's a link to join us if you want to come on and offer your
Oh man, yeah,
contribution.
that's right. We can have you live on stream with us. Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Well, not if you don't want to.
True. And you do have to have like a camera and stuff, it makes it better if you do.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you had one more quote from chapter 8, or did we?
Yeah, just one last quote. When all in your race are led to mastery and achieve it, is the
There we go. So we'll highlight that and read it here. When all in your race are led to mastery and achieve it, then your race as a whole, for your race is a whole, will move easily through time and space. You will have mastered the laws of physics as you understood them, and you will seek to assist those belonging to other races and other civilizations in coming to mastery as well.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of a cool way that kind of encapsulate or ties together the idea like the highly evolved beings, where you kind of, after you get to a point, or the reference to the human species at a point, then you start going out and evolving other species. So sort of like a Star Trek kind of thing going on there.
back to cause another to have what you have. Like once you awaken, you cause others to awaken to step more
Yeah,
into your
and
awakeness.
others in the sense is other species. Yeah, which is really cool actually when you put it in that lens, Hank. That's cool. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
fun of yeah, yeah. Thank you.
you're welcome. All right. So on to chapter 9. Was there anything that really stood out to you in this one?
Man, chapter 9, I have all kinds of notes. I've got a whole page of notes from chapter 9, and I think it was because or no, it wasn't a whole page. Oh, sorry. Chapter 9 and 10 are on the same page. Sorry, it's not a whole page. Yeah, I had a couple things. In this chapter, Neale brings up a lot of questions about, he brings up one thing about, he doesn't want to have to be the hope of the species. So God has this whole response of like, well, if you're really awake, like it's not really about being the hope as much as like just being and
Hmm.
then changing, that you're not like a hope or someone else. It's not some task, like because you have this awareness and you've started to become awake and you're acknowledging you're awake. It's not like some forced thing, like it's all on you, like you're the one person on the planet that that can go do this. That isn't the intent of any of the conversation here or the invitation. It's more of the you kind of start with
Hmm.
you and it just grows naturally or very easy, with a lot of ease.
And I get the sense that in a way, like when you really start to step into this awakeness, that the role of that, or what you might call in the old esoteric text, like being an aspirant or there's another word for it, but like the ego is a little bit more tamed, and you're not doing it for
Mm-hmm.
self praise or anything like that. You're recognizing that you're doing it because you see that you are one with everything. You're in the world, but not of it at that point, and you're recognizing that though we are all individualizations of divinity, we are all also one. And by helping in this way, you're really being self first for the species and
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Oh, thank
There was
you
a.
for contributing that, because that tied together things really well. Because the next comment I had from the book was that God talks that it's not about walking around and declaring yourself to be the model of perfection, but presenting yourself authentically. So it's not saying, hey, look at me, this is awakened. It's being like, hey, here I am, uh, warts and all, as I be, and just being authentically you. And that's what it's about. It's not that you're great or that your way is perfect. It's that the imperfections are part of the perfection, that we're all where we're at and stumbling and laughing and making mistakes and slip ups, and that it's all part of the growth and the experience of self-expression. So that's a lot of chapter 9.
That about sums it up.
There you go. You don't have to read it. We did it for you.
Yeah,
I did like the section "Awakening of others will not happen by chance." You gotta say happen.
of others will not happen by chance. So right here.
Yeah. So this had to do with like, if you take the invitation, the third invitation, which is, to awaken the species, it's kind of the invitation that started the whole book. That's what this is. Um, and it has to do with there's people out there. It could be you, it could be me, it could be Hank, it could be any of us. Where there's some amount of people that were sort of doing the things that a highly evolved being or an awakened person would do, but there wasn't necessarily like an intention of changing or awaken to it. It was sort of like it was just a natural occurrence. And the main thing that God is basically getting at is that the intent behind being awake or acknowledging or really being intent in what you're doing is from an awakened place or an awakened space, that creates a lot different energetic, they call it signature. It creates a lot different energetic signature out there when you're doing it with an intent instead of just naturally. Now, that's not saying that it's wrong, like if it happened naturally, because there's no right and wrong, as they talk about, earlier and, later in this chapter, or chapter 10. But it's just that, when you go with an intent that you're operating from an awakened space, it just sort of shifts things. Hank, do you have anything to kind of play off of that?
No, well, intention, it just, I would say, adds potency. So if you're acting consciously versus unconsciously, like if you're just swimming, think about it this way, like, okay, you're in the pool and you're swimming and you're just swimming to swim versus you're swimming with the intent to win a race. Like your entire motivation, the potency of moving through the water shifts dramatically when you're actually putting your intention and your full focus in it, when you're congruent with everything you're doing instead of just kind of doing it haphazardly or on autopilot.
Yeah. I guess for me, I was just talking about intent there, and I guess for me, like, that started to feel like sort of heavy. This, like, the idea of intent, or the way I was presenting it there. It's sort of the energy for me that's really what it's about. That
Mm-hmm.
it's somewhat deliberate. That you're aware and you're choosing more of your own self-expression, like, and you're deliberately choosing that. You're not just accidentally doing it.
Right. And English is probably like, if to use a non-English word for it, in Quechua there is this word called munai, and munai is a combination of your will and your love expressed. It's more of like a declaration of what you're choosing, and that word seems to encapsulate like the energy that I feel behind that word intention as he's using it, because it's more like from the depths of your soul. It's like you're all in with what you're doing instead of just on autopilot moving through life.
And probably the awareness I have is, there's a lot of, I get the sense that there's a lot of charge around the word intention. It's thrown around, I think, because it's thrown around in a lot of circles,
Mm-hmm.
this intent to do things. And I think I'm picking up just a lot of that energy, where it's really about just deliberately choosing more of your own self-expression, is how I would kind of put it, more different.
Or kind of a backwards thing with it, like when you aren't using your intention, you do things that you don't intend, like say you get into a car accident. Oh, I didn't intend to hit you, right? Well, but if you had been using your intention, you probably wouldn't have, but because you weren't using intention at all, an accident occurred. So a lot of things happen when you're not using intention that aren't necessarily your preferred experience. So but when you start to step into intention, you have a much more rich life, because you're propelling
Yeah,
yourself through more.
that's the energy I get, where I got this energy of, like, Jesus, take the wheel. And it's like, um, that's okay, being in touch with your inner divine and things. It's also like, you're operating the vehicle still. Like, you may be more open and to channel or be in that energy and space. It's like you still have to drive the car. Like, so that means being aware of the vehicles around you. And, oh, if you're aware of them, all of a sudden you can actually maybe choose to, avoid them
Right.
if they're coming at you. You start to have more of this, oh, I'm driving the vehicle and I'm receiving that. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a contribution for me to have the awareness of what others are doing on the road.
And this kind of can segue into one of the comments that Annie made, that when you are consciously intending, you're taking a step back and you're really showing up for the experience. She was saying that she likes how someone had said that you are now the observer, no longer playing in the drama. So instead of reacting through life, you're taking a step back, you're seeing what's occurring, and now you're making conscious choice. You're being the observer,
Yeah.
and kind of going with that. And then also she was saying that this keeps you
Oh,
from reacting out of emotion or ego.
yeah. Oh, can you flip back to that last
First
one?
one? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that really beautiful observation there, not to borrow the observer word, but whoever said that, it's got a certain beauty to it, where, yeah, it is a lot. And I had this awareness probably, it was recent, maybe 4 months ago. I kind of had that awareness of the energy you're talking about here, where you kind of step back and look at it from a kind of a different point of view, like a bird's eye view. And it's like, holy smokes. That is a way different perspective than playing in the drama itself. It's like when you can look at it for what it is from a point of view and go, oh, that's like a drama thing, and like I can choose to participate.
Or
And
instead of
like,
being, oh, go ahead. I thought you were
yeah,
wrapping.
I don't know. It's like it's just like all of a sudden you don't have to like cling to the drama. It's like, oh, it's drama and I have a different choice. It doesn't mean it goes away. It's just like you have a space to choose different. It's just really fun. I enjoy that energy. I just think it's such a nice awakeness to get to or acknowledge. It's just a cool space.
It is a cool space. I know. I think Dan Millman talks a lot about being the observer and the experience too. So that's a Peaceful Warrior. If you ever read that book, it's also a movie. Really, really good spiritual movie if you're looking for something good to watch. Okay, what on to next?
Yeah, I just had a note from page 60, which is part of book 9, and they kind of go into the extraterrestrial conversation, or outer space is kind of what they're talking about here. And, you know, Neale has a definition for outer space, and then God has a bit of a different definition. Probably makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of our call where they're talking about that other beings aren't necessarily from this physical cosmic realm. They could also be interdimensional or in different planes. It's not
Yeah,
not always or he quoted Shakespeare. There are
he
more
does.
oh, I'm trying to remember the quote for
There
Shakespeare.
are more to the cosmos than what are in your books, Horatio, in your
Yeah.
philosophy. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And to continue that, the universe is far more interdimensional. What is it? The
Yeah,
universe
yeah.
is much larger and far more interdimensional than you may think. So basically saying the idea or the perceived notion that outer space is like, you know, the planets and the stars and that's outer space. It's like God's kind of hinting it's a little bit it's probably a bit grander or more intricate or cooler, I guess, than just that. Hank, it seemed like you had a contribution on that.
No, it was just I was just thinking about Star Trek in that moment, how they have like there's episodes where there's these beings that are just out of phase. Like there was one whole episode like that, and like what if a lot of these beings is like that? They could be like right next to you, inspiring you for things, and they're just not in the visible field, and you would have to have your senses turned on in order to have the creationship or relationship with them. That was all. Let's see. What else? Oh wow, that's a short chapter, isn't it? Or we kind of jumped around maybe.
It seemed longer. I think there's a lot of dialogue there. There's this kind of chunk of the book, to me it was kind of like there's a lot of explaining about topics that I was like, okay, I think I kind of got that. It may be different for anyone else reading. I thought some of these topics, it was a little bit tough to pull out like what the the nuggets of the chapter were, because it was kind of like, oh, they just kind of like talked around a few different things and like kind of meandered this chapter. So
Yeah, well, I think depending, like if people are reading this for the first time and they never heard about a dimension and they never heard about some of these things, a lot of that
right.
dialogue could be really useful because they even used the word unpacking. Could you unpack that for me a bit? And they're kind of taking it where if you didn't have any concept for this, it starts to build the framework where you can
Yeah.
get on board with it.
Yeah, which is really nice. So, you know, if you are you know, less familiar with some of the words we're throwing around, and haven't checked out the book, encourage you to do so, because there are parts that Hank and I have kind of skipped over in terms of the formal sort of definitions and exposition around some of this stuff. There's some really good dialogue on it. Hank and I are, to a degree, in a space where we're kind of familiar with that, as far as the words and stuff. So we don't spend as much time typically looking at the words and the energies underneath them. But please, by all means, check out the book if you're if you're not sure about it, or ask us if there's a topic that maybe you're not quite grasping, and we can go take a deeper dive into it. There's probably a lot of good awareness as to for all of us to come out with any questions.
If you do pick up the book, you have 2 whole weeks, because we do this particular discussion on the third and the fourth Tuesdays, and then the other Tuesdays we're doing a few other things. Like next week is power possibilities, and then a general discussion on CwG, and then we'll back to the book. So you have a little time to catch up if you want to read through chapter 10 and then wherever we're going to read through to for next time.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing 5 at a time, so it'll be up through chapter 15 next week.
Yeah, unless there's like a super long chapter or something, but yeah, we will play by ear.
So far, not too many super long chapters. Listening, it's like less than an hour to cover 5 chapters, maybe 45 minutes. It's actually pretty quick.
And the Audible, because of the different voices, we mentioned it on the last book club, that it just gives you a different awareness around it, because Neale plays himself, and then they have 2 voices playing God, a male and a female. So it's really neat to see that change back and forth, because it starts to break down our preconceived notions of whatever we think that is. So it's a great little, I would recommend the audio version if you can get it. Plus, it's cool to hear Neale's personality come out in a little bit. When he's flustered, you can really hear it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed that part of it, to really get a sense of kind of what Neale was about when he was experiencing this, and kind of the way he experienced the conversation. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because he wrote the book.
Oh, yeah. And then on to chapter 10. You still good to go, Sean? Because I know we're planning on an hour, a little bit over now, but
we'll probably end up about an hour and 15, which I think is okay, because we're not streaming to Instagram, right?
No, can't. Well, I upload Instagram after the fact, so we're over already, so it doesn't matter.
Wah, wah.
That's okay.
One of the things I talk about in this chapter, and it's a heavy topic for me, but I get that there may be some of you listening, or for the first time, or you're kind of in this space. They talk about like being confined to a body, and the idea that you're not confined to a body is a big part of this chapter. That you, the being, it's totally a choice to be in a body, and that's kind of the essence of this whole chapter. Is the idea that you don't have to have a body, but any of us that currently have a body, are choosing to have a body to experience the things that you can experience by having a body. Right. And for a lot of the human species, having a body means experiencing the body all the way through its progression, from conception to being a baby, to a child, to adolescence, being an adult, and then eventually, getting old. That's part of the experience that we're choosing to go through, and we've chosen to do that perhaps many, many times. And it's not a wrongness. It's just the way God describes it is that we're looking to see and experience ourselves through as many lenses as we can. And from a physical sense, that means being young and old and a baby and a toddler, and just getting this expression of ourselves as much as we can. And then kind of when you've had that expression, or your own purposes of the embodiment are the nourishment that you'd like to have gotten, you start to kind of move towards this highly evolved beingness, where you move between the metaphysical and the physical, where you can show up basically in any body just to experience a particular part of of expression that you can't experience through the metaphysical, but it's essentially like you manifest the body just to experience a certain, part of life, and then you can choose to revert back. And that's a lot of or go back to metaphysical. And that's a lot of this dialogue in chapter 10 is about these kinds of ideas.
And one thing that he also touched on was that and you already touched on it a little bit, but you're not in the body because you have to earn your way out, or because there's this karmic debt and you have to evolve or anything like that. It is a pure choice. And based on what we know when we're not in the physical, we've chosen to come here. And even Neale said, well, I wouldn't choose this. Like, why would I choose this with all the pain and suffering? And God says, you did choose this, and you're going to choose it again, because there's just so much you can experience in this physical reality and duality that you can't from the space of oneness, because it's only conceptual instead of experiential. And that's why the choice is made like that. Ooh. Another fun thing. Have you heard of Dick Sutphin, Sean, at all? Do you know the name? He's a past life regression hypnotherapist. He's kind of like the godfather of hypnotherapy. And one of the theories that he had why so many people have these awarenesses of having like a past life of being Cleopatra or like these different famous people. Well, really are thousands of people really that? But he was saying that as a stream of consciousness, you can step in to a body just for a short period of time to have an experience and then go. You're not even there. So like existence and being in the physical body can be very, I just say that to open the door a little bit on how we think about things, that you could be in a spot just for a little bit and then move and skip and hop over to have different experiences and different realities and bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, that when I go into that topic, I kind of get heaviness in my body around it. I just kind of maybe go for what would shift it. Yeah.
No, I like conversations like that. They make my head go, phew. That's fun stuff. So is there anything else in chapter 10 that, well, you kind of summarized it really well, I do believe. Literally at all cost. Well, but he was talking about death here, that we fear the process by which continue to evolve. We profoundly fear disembodiment, what we call death, and thus seek to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, and there is an important part of this chapter. And it's not so much high level beings or anything, but it just has to do with the general conversation. And like for anybody listening or joining our conversation and reading the book and engaging, the quote, if you can pull it up, Pink, it's if you couldn't understand it, the conversation wouldn't be being had. So basically that, if you're tapped in, or you're engaging with this dialogue, and these high evolved beings, you wouldn't have picked up the book.
What was the quote again?
It's if you couldn't understand it.
Am I misspelling something?
It might be could not.
I thought well, maybe I didn't try both ways. Oh, that's it. Proper writing, don't use contractions. You asked if you could understand in layman's terms all of this, and I said, yes, you have. No, that's not is that the one?
That's not it. No.
I don't know. So it's probably going to bring back a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, location. Not sure which one. There's a lot of places where that comes in. Understand. Oh, it's not doing understand it. It gave me all of understands. Oh, well, let's see if we can just find it. Was it towards the end of the chapter? Help you understand. Nope. Ooh, I love this actually. I'll jump on this before we look for the other one. The very last paragraph, second to last paragraph. think of the physicality as the prism of ultimate reality. When the soul passes through the prism into physicality, it breaks into its constituent parts: body, mind, spirit. I've used the human body as an analogy before, where like if you have the unrefined light coming through you and through all the filters of experience, and it expresses out in that rainbow prism, right? The goal would be to refine all those energies, to apply them skillfully, so you can create like balance them to express that divine white light into the physical plane. So just the prism reminded me of that, one of the analogies I used to kind of explain how humanity works with bringing that light through and then expressing it into our experience.
We're
Okay.
rainbows. Haha. Yes,
Rainbow.
we're rainbows. Totally. So the quote
We
is,
are.
if you couldn't understand all of this.
If you couldn't
Yep.
understand all. No.
It's not in your book.
Oh,
Nor would
apparently.
those. How about nor would those who are following it? That's it.
I wonder how that doesn't work. Anyway. So it's on this last page
Kind
before.
of a 2-page, yeah. Oh, I love the rainbows.
If you couldn't understand all of this, we wouldn't even be having the conversation, nor would those who are following it right now.
Mm-hmm. Which for me was just a nice acknowledgement that, like, even if there's parts of the book that maybe you're not getting, or you think that you're not going to get any of it ever, it's like, you wouldn't engage with it and be following it if you weren't capable of understanding it. Which I just thought was kind of a nice, like, affirmation of sorts. Like, you're engaged with the book and you're doing it, and, like, you're fully capable of understanding all that you'd like to know. May not seem like it, but you are.
Awesome.
No need for doubt. Heck no doubt. No. No. No, we don't need to doubt. In fact, in some of the training I've had, doubt is actually the starting place of pretty much any limitation. Doubt is one of the most core things that we can do to limit ourselves, is to doubt. So yeah, if you're operating from that space, start to play with what it would be like to know that you know what you know.
Right. And doubt too is the beginning of, like, Ryan describes this a lot with our business partners, that ego's job is to keep you safe, and it lets you choose the same conditions over and over again because it knows that you survive them. And when you start talking about stuff like this, stuff that's a whole new possibility, the ego freaks out and it throws up everything that it can to try to get you to choose something lesser instead of greater. And if you feel that doubt or that fear, Neale has a great analogy I saw on he's on Amazon Prime. There's like a whole television show where Neale does processing for people, like on camera. And he gave this analogy for fear as feeling excited and ready. And what if you could take that doubt, take that element of fear, and shift it to excitement for something new that you're going to be doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm playing off of the fear because I definitely came up with that. Hank, I think the feeling ready and excited is a good way to look at it. And pulling from access consciousness a little bit, they talk about, where we've misidentified fear as, like, we go into this place where you start thinking of a possibility and you're like, oh my gosh, da 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 da, like, and you start to get this, like, ooh, that sounds fun. Then all of a sudden you go into this doubt. Well, that couldn't happen. Because we misidentify the fear as our excitement about something. When we really get the energy of something that we like to do, and then all of a sudden pull back, because we're afraid that something great might happen. that's really us misidentifying what was excitement. We were so excited. We're like, yes, energetically, I can feel the fibers in my being of this being something amazing. And then you come up with all the reasons, and doubt being one of the main modes that we can go to of limiting ourselves after that, where we really got all this excitement, and then it's like, oh, we're not really excited, we're afraid. It's like, no, you really are excited, dang it. Like, it might be awesome.
And I've given this example in Power Possibilities. Well, first, Dr. Dane here from Access talks about when he was little, and I forget if it was a merry-go-round or a Ferris wheel, some sort of carnival ride, and he was all excited about going on it. And then his mom says, "No, honey, don't be afraid." And he uses that as an example as a child where you have excitement, and a comment like that causes you to start to misidentify excitement with fear. And then how many times does that come up where you're being afraid where you're really being excited? And then I had my own experience when we were at Disney. My older son, he didn't want to ride any roller coasters, and we would have to do the parent swab and everything like that, and just take my son Oliver on twice. He loved that part. But finally, we were in the ride for Slinky Dog, which is like one of the more fast rides there. Really, like it shoots up with like magnetic technology. I don't know how it works, but he wasn't going to go on it again with us again. And I remember Dr. Dane's story, and I said, "Well, Max, let me ask you something. Are you afraid? Are you excited?" And it took him off guard, and he paused for a moment. He's like, "I'm excited." And then he got on, he rode it, and then you couldn't get him off the thing. He just wanted to ride it over and over again. And that was like a real life example of how he was feeling fear, but it was really excitement, and he was misidentifying it probably because of something else my wife and I told him when he was little, So how many times have you been stuck because of a past belief that you can let go of now and have a whole different experience around fear and excitement?
Yeah. I just laugh because it's just like, yeah, like how much fear have you how much excitement have you misidentified as fear? It's just amazing.
Very cool. All right. Yeah, so this is another great awareness, and we could probably start with this with Power Possibilities next week.
Totally next week,
Yeah, but we'll touch on it. But when you say be careful, like Access, we would say be aware. Like you're not saying be careful, you're saying be aware, so you can make choices. Where being careful means like you're kind of holding back and sometimes not being in a space of awareness, and then other things can happen because you're not being aware when you're trying to be careful. So anyway, we'll start with that next Tuesday with Power Possibilities. We just have to remember that we're going to do that, otherwise we'll forget. So if you're going to be on, Becky, let us know. We were going to talk about being careful versus being aware next week too.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's same time as this, 7:00 Eastern next week.
Yep. And that one we're a little bit more flowy with the dialogue.
Yeah, we're a little more goofy because we don't have a conversation or a book to rein us in sometimes, so we can get a little.
Yeah. We'll probably keep it to, well, we've been doing those for 90 minutes, but after an hour, you can really tell that we got even more goofy.
Yeah, for a couple weeks, it was like we did an hour, and it was like solid, and then the last half was just like, oh geez.
All good things though.
Totally fun.
So, any final thoughts? Are we good to just close up here?
Not much from me particularly.
Or you have a class. We can talk about things coming up. You have a class this weekend?
Oh yeah, I do. I could talk about my class. So if anyone is interested in access consciousness and particularly learning or participating in the introductory class for access, which is the access bars class, I'm going to be hosting basically a training class this Saturday. And we already have, I think 4, maybe 5 people signed up. So it's going to be really fun. So if you've been kind of on the fence or not sure or debating, what am I going to choose next? You can choose my bars class, and it'll be so much fun. And we learn the points and touch our heads, and you receive the processes, and it's just so cool.
Is that barswithsean.com?
Yeah, it's Access with Sean now. Bars with Sean is hopefully redirecting to it though.
Accesswithsean.com?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the website where you can find out about the class. And then for me, I will be doing a virtual concert on Friday, hosted by Fellowships of the Spirit. You could go to fellowshipspirit.com for that one. And then Saturday is my first of a 5-part series called Attune Your Life. And it's going to be using a lot of these types of tools along with some shamanic practices to remove limitations and then get the body, mind, spirit, and beyond all lined up and to start really consciously creating your life. So that's like a 5-part, 2-hour Zoom calls basically that's going to start and kick off on Saturday, and then it's going to go for 4 Mondays after that. Because my original class at Lilydale, it was about tuning forks, and I can't do that through Zoom, so I had to reinvent it on very short notice because my class had to go virtual. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, Hank.
It is. Alrighty, so I'm going to switch the brand here so I could actually play my my video. Oh wow, I actually had the Awaken the Species up here too, so it's like didn't change on me. All right. Oh, did someone make a comment before we need to go here? Oh, and he was just saying thank you, blessings. And then we also have Mike giving us a whole bunch of crying faces and unicorns. Becky's asking, is the bars class virtual? If you have, well, I don't know, are you set up to do that? Because they do have a virtual option. But
we should be clear. My bars class will be live, and we'll be doing social distance stuff, and we're going to limit the class size a little bit. But we'll be in person at Holistic Health and Healing. If you'd like to take a virtual bars class, they are going to have one. Brendan Watt, who's one of the big facilitators in Access, will be hosting a virtual bars class July 8th, I want to say. If you go to accessconsciousness.com, you can find out more details. My class, though, is going to be in person. So just do what you will with that awareness.
Yeah, but John, you could do it virtual. We have a limited window where we can, if you wanted to.
We can do it virtual. Part of the honoring, I think, of the in-person class, though, is that I think we're not supposed to do both at once. So if we'd like to do a virtual class, we need to make it like a virtual class, not to do both at once. So.
Okay, well, I'll throw that out then. If anybody has you and a friend, if you have a +1 that also wants to take it, because that's one of the requirements. If you want to take it virtually, you have to have another person physically present with you also taking the class so you can do the trades and all the coaching then happens. But I would highly recommend that class live is a bit more dynamic and a lot more fun.
And it is recommended to do it in person. Gary Douglas, who founded Access and, channeled the bars points, recommends not doing it virtual. I'd say especially if it's kind of your first time learning the bars, that physical and having a facilitator there in the room is in a lot of ways more dynamic. It's not saying don't do it, because we know people are going to do it anyways. But it's just like, with that awareness, if you're able to wait or choose it in person, that's good. But if you're feeling like you need to stay home and inside, then find a buddy, and Hank and I would be willing to facilitate. So, or Hank for sure.
Yeah. Well, we got the camera, we got the microphones, we got a whole soundboard. We could definitely do it. And Sean and I would be happy to co-facilitate stuff like that because we work well together. We're goofy, all kinds of fun stuff. All right. Well, with that, we'll see you guys. Well, for one, I will be on again tonight at midnight, or I guess tomorrow at midnight, with Midnight Meanderings. That's going to stream to the Stir Crazy Shamans page, though. So if you're interested and you're up tonight, you can see me and Brian, my brother on the path, who's kind of crazy, which is why the broadcast is fun. But we will see you next time.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
See you next week.